There is a lot of confusion at the moment about if or how you should be fueling your early morning session. You have some social media experts telling you that you shouldn't be eating anything before your sessions because that way you will oxidize more fat. Others are saying that any amount of fasted training will lead to your cortisol spiking, leaving you a limp noodle with hormonal problems. And then we also have the well-meaning dietitians who are telling you that 90 minutes pre-session you should be eating exactly 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrates before your session, regardless if that means that you have to get up at 3:30 to eat that meal. But what actually matters when it comes to fueling your early morning sessions? In this video, I'm going to be explaining exactly how to fuel your early morning sessions, if you should be pounding simple carbohydrates, when it's fine to train fasted, and if you need to worry about things like cortisol when it comes to your hormones and muscle mass. And what are the best options if you only have 15 to 30 minutes in the morning before you train? Just so you're not thinking, who the fuck is this guy to be telling me what to eat? My name is James. I've been a performance nutritionist for about a decade now. I've worked with over 500 clients now, including ultra marathoners, endurance trainers, fighters, bodybuilders, cyclists, and everything in between. Oh, and if you are an endurance athlete and you want a little bit more detailed information, we've got a free PDF below called Fuel Like You Mean It that kind of goes through what you should be having, the why behind it for both your everyday training and competitions. Now let's get stuck into it. So, to eat or not to eat? That is the question. But realistically, it's not actually a simple answer because it's going to depend on a lot of context. The type of session, the goal of the session, the duration, the intensity, and of course, personal preference. So let's quickly go through each one of those so you can understand why that factors in and what you need to consider. And then later on, I'm going to give you a really simple scorecard that you can use to figure out, should I fuel this session or can I train fast? So first and foremost, we need to consider, what is the goal of the session? Are you just going out there and looking to get it done? You don't really care about how fast you run or how far you go. You're just going out for a simple jog to get the legs moving, to get the body moving. This might be one of those easy runs where you're just trying to get some miles in the legs, but you're not really concerned about how fast you're going. On the opposite hand, are you going out there trying to perform at your best? Are you trying to maximize the adaptations from that training session? What your goal is for the individual session will have a really big impact on how you fuel it. The second thing that we need to consider is intensity. How hard are you actually working in the session? Are you just going out for an easy 5 to 10K where your heart rate's staying low, or you're just going to the gym, getting on the cardio machine and just jogging along? Or are you pushing the intensity up? Are you doing intervals, tempo, threshold? Are you doing a high intensity workout, sprints, or something like that? As your heart rate increases and you're working harder, the amount of glucose or carbohydrates that you need and that you're going to be using is going to rise. So that's going to dictate what kind of fueling strategy you use for those sessions. And you might be thinking, well, can't I just get fat adapted so that I use more fat for fuel? But the issue with high intensity sessions is that of how much time we have. Your body's energy needs are so high that it requires energy turnover to be pretty fast. Fats cannot meet those energy requirements because it takes time for your body to pull the fat out of cells, break it down, transport it to the other cells where it's needed to then be used for energy. And the body just does not have time to do that. It needs energy now. And that's why things like carbs, blood sugar, and glycogen can be a lot faster. All right, let's go through the should I fuel scorecard. For each of these questions or statements, if it is true, you're going to tick the box and give yourself 1 point. If by the end you score 2 or more points, that is an indication that you should probably fuel that session. So the first question there, is the session moderate to high intensity? If it's a yes, then tick that box. Second, duration, is it above 60 to 90 minutes? If you're going above that, tick that box and we'll say yes. And is performance important to you in this session, or are you just getting it done? So go through those questions, tick the boxes that are true. If you tick 2 or more, then that's an indication that you should probably fuel that session. Now, you'll notice that we didn't talk about personal preference, but that is a huge factor. At the end of the day, some people are going to feel better training fasted and other people are going to train better feeling fed. And there is also something to adaptation. You might be someone that believes that you feel better training fasted, but it's actually that you just haven't got used to consuming food. Or maybe you've been trying to consume whole foods or foods that are too bulky that have been sitting in your stomach and have been making you uncomfortable, which we'll talk about in a second. But if you are someone that likes to train fasted, it's probably not going to be the end of the world. I think one thing that we need to remember with all of this is that people have been getting fitter, have been getting faster, have probably got to levels that we can't even dream of without fueling optimally. So if you are someone who prefers to train fasted, who doesn't want to consume something, that is absolutely fine. You will still get fitter, you can still get faster. So we need to consider that personal preference. Okay, so now you should have a bit better of an idea of which sessions might benefit from fueling and which sessions you can probably get away training fasted if you want. But what should you actually be eating? And is training fasted really bad from a hormonal and muscle maintenance? That was weird. Muscle maintenance standpoint. So, one of the biggest issues that I see when people want to be fueling their early morning sessions is that they feel like they don't know what to eat. And often they try to eat things that are going to be sitting in their stomach or they feel uncomfortable. So, what we need to look at is how long do you have before your session? If you have 45 to 60 minutes, then we can look at simple carbohydrates in a food form. So my go-to for this would be something like crumpets with some honey on top. You could also look at something like a banana, you could look at some dates, you could look at some kind of simple carbohydrate energy bar. There's a whole host of things that you can look at, and there's more in the PDF below, as I said. As you get closer to the training session, let's say that you're training really early or you just value your sleep and you get up maybe like 15 to 30 minutes before you've got to get to the gym or get to the track or wherever you're going. In that scenario, we probably need to be looking more towards liquid carbohydrates as the main fueling source. Now, this can also be quite a good option if you are getting up even earlier than that, because the liquids are going to help with hydration as well. And that's one thing that we haven't talked about and that people don't consider as much, is that often when you wake up in the morning, you do have mild dehydration. You know, when you go to the bathroom, you take a piss and you can see that it's probably a little bit more yellow than it was either at the end of the day or during the day. That's a sign that you might be mildly dehydrated because you haven't drunk any fluids throughout the night. Something like a liquid carbohydrate can actually be a really good option here. You can get plenty of options where you just mix in a carbohydrate powder with water. You know, you've got the ones from the supermarket like Gatorade, Powerade. There's plenty online. Bulk Nutrients have their Sports Fuel 101. I think there's a few other brands that you can use as well, or you can make your own. All of those are absolutely valid, or you can just have, you know, a large glass of water with your simple carbohydrates. So again, if we're coming back to that 15 to 30 minutes frame, you probably want to be looking at liquids or really simple carbs. So that could literally be like some lollies, a handful of lollies, a couple of jelly snakes, whatever your preference is, a little bit of honey, something like that, just to get some really simple carbohydrates in, as well as some fluids, which will help with the digestion and absorption of those carbohydrates without leaving you feeling really heavy, really full, and having gastric issues during the training session. On a personal note, I would say that if you are someone that does tend to have a sensitive stomach, or you're someone that does feel uncomfortable, if you can, getting up a little bit earlier and getting that fuel in a little bit earlier is probably beneficial in my experience. But if not, then you just do the best that you can. And as I said, people have obviously been making improvements, have been getting fitter and faster without, you know, actively fueling these types of sessions. It might just not happen as fast, and the adaptations, you might not be able to work quite as hard. Also, if you want help with what carbohydrates and in what amounts, check out the links below, because I'm going to create a carb cheat sheet for you guys so you can kind of choose, okay, well, I've got 30 minutes before my session. Here's what I should be aiming for with simple carbohydrates, or if you've got a little bit longer, here are some other options and things like that. So check out the description below and we'll have the cheat sheet in there. The last thing that I wanted to address was this kind of common concept at the moment that seems to be making the rounds on social media around cortisol. We seem to be fearing cortisol a lot at the moment, and I think it's tied into this narrative specifically around women and hormonal health and things like that. So there's been a few pretty prominent influencers talking about how women shouldn't train fasted because it leads to a spike in cortisol, which has been associated with increased muscle mass breakdown, with potential hormonal issues, and a whole host of other things. But what I actually think is happening here, and what they're often not clear about, is that one, cortisol spikes are a completely normal physiological thing in the body. They happen day to day. They happen when we train fasted. They happen when we're stressed. They happen when we wake up in the morning. Cortisol spikes are a normal part of our body, and they actually play a pretty important role. So it's not something that we necessarily need to be focused on or trying to reduce. Where we get into issues with cortisol is if we have chronically high cortisol level issues, and that's something that you would have to address with like an endocrinologist and your doctor, not necessarily something that you would be, just avoiding having caffeine early in the morning, or avoiding fasted cardio or something like that. The second thing is that when we talk about cortisol spikes and those negative associations that they talked about, we need to remember that that's exactly what they are. They're associations, they're not causation. We can't say directly that a spike in cortisol is going to lead to an increase in muscle breakdown or muscle loss over time. And in fact, when we look at the studies in the literature, we don't have any studies that are directly showing that fasted training leads to more muscle loss or less muscle gain over time. And when we think about the hormonal aspect of it, while there can be an association there, it's often because it is also associated with low energy availability. Often what we will see is that people that maybe train fasted or have higher cortisol spikes are also chronically underfueling. And that's the big issue there, is that when you're chronically underfueling, we do see low energy availability, which can lead to losses in muscle mass, reductions in performance, hormonal issues, and things like that. But just training fasted is not going to be a direct cause of hormonal issues for the majority of healthy women. You can train fasted if you want. You just need to make sure that you are eating an appropriate amount and that you're ideally consuming something relatively soon after that fasted training session. All right, guys, so now you have a much better idea around fueling your fasted training sessions, which ones you should be fueling, which ones are okay to train fasted with, and that you probably don't need to worry about cortisol spikes if you prefer to train fasted. And while that's all well and good, you need to be able to then follow that up and know what you're consuming after a session to make sure that you are maximizing recovery, setting yourself up to be able to perform in your next sessions, and making sure that we're getting the most from those training sessions, allowing adaptations in the body. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in my next video. At some point that will be here. But until then, have a great day.